Hello, welcome to Santa Barbara Forum. I'm your host tonight, Mike Williams. Joining me, Ted Adams, both with the Wildland Residents Association. You might know us both from Community Alert on KZSB AM 1290, FM 96.9. We've been there we're into our 16th year now with Community Alert.
I think so.
Yeah, anyway, we want to get in tonight and talk about the Wildland Residents Association. It's been around for quite a while now, and I thought the best thing to do is bring in the gentleman that started it all. The who, what, when, where, how, and why. Tell us the story.
Well, it actually it came out of a wildfire, the Sycamore Fire, that occurred in Montecito on the 26th of July, 1977, at 7:30 in the evening, and it burned for about 12 hours and took out about 234 structures in Sycamore Canyon and out on the face of the Riviera, actually. And there was quite a bit of concern. It was the first time, I think, that many people in the public realized that the wildfires could actually get into the city, and that there was a real problem there. And Ron Patterson, who was the county fire chief at the time, contacted me because I made a statement to the news press at a news conference the next day about how people that stay with their homes get to save their homes. That was the gist of it. And he asked me if I didn't think that we might be able to start a volunteer group on the mountain, because it took so long for the county fire equipment to get up into Painted Cave, and I'd lived in Painted Cave for many years, and so we did. We started out. They gave us a fire truck from the county fire department and CB radios, which didn't work worth a damn because of the mountain community. But it was several years before we really got a professional radio system. But we organized, and we started meeting every couple of weeks. At that time, it was the Cielo store. Right. And that's a piece of history now. But brought the community. We decided that we were going to bring all the small communities on the mountain together. There's about 5 of them, and then some of the areas that are just residential areas that aren't really community areas. And so we got individuals from each one of those areas, and they acted as representatives for their communities. And we started having meetings, and it just grew from there. And
well, it quickly evolved into more than just fire suppression or fire prevention, didn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, what happened was that we became the group for notifying individuals because of our radio system, and having the knowledge of people who were handicapped or elderly, and then we got into evacuations, and we started doing many of the things that we talk about now on Community Alert, of getting people to understand what they need to deal with and know about when the fires and there's smoke in the air and that sort of thing.
Now, what other communities on the South Coast had something similar to the Wildland Residents Association at the time, or was this completely new and innovative?
It was pretty much new at that time. In the following years, we assisted other communities all the way down to San Diego. Curtis Vincent, who was an early advocate in the fire groups, and myself went into many areas and helped them get organized. And that was kind of towards the end of the 90s that actually started happening, because that was more about the fire safe councils, which is something else that we can talk about in a little while.
Well, I want to get into fire safe council because the WRA was kind of a precursor to that.
It was, and I think that because we were so successful and the community accepted it so much and really got behind the learning curve and understanding how to deal with wildfire, that the idea caught on.
Now, one of the things that strike me is because I came up from Los Angeles, so I come into the area of San Marcos Pass in 1991. So most of what you're talking about was well before I was even in the county. I moved up here in '84. The thing that struck me initially was that you have a fairly eclectic community, many of whom are not, I would say, the most avid government supporter types. I mean, and everything in between. and yet you were able to bring everybody together and work together in a common goal, and I think that's very remarkable. How did you do that?
Well, I think the main thing that happened was that people realized that we really needed to work together because of the fire danger. And we needed to pull together because it took quite a while for the agencies to get into the mountains. And they were more concerned with fire suppression, and they weren't really paying a lot of attention to the residents. I mean, they would tell them to leave and that sort of thing, but as far as doing any kind of planned evacuation or any of that sort of thing. And I think that everyone's interest was really piqued, no matter where they were in the spectrum of social behavior. They saw the need for coming together that way. And I think that's why we've been successful with our radio show, because I think people really need that information and they're glad to get it.
Well, I think it's important to point out too, in the 80s, the fire service, not Orange County, but Santa Barbara Fire, was completely different in its abilities and capabilities and their equipment and their staffing and their response time, most notably, than what it is today. Today is vastly superior.
Well, most of them didn't have any kind of wildfire capabilities. They were all residential engines, and they were more concerned with the urban areas until they realized in the late 80s and early 90s that these wildfires were burning into the communities, and they needed to have brush trucks and that smaller vehicles to be able, four-wheel drive, et cetera, to get after the fire.
Well, now, Santa Barbara County has always been one of the leading agencies in California, Santa Barbara County, in developing wildland fire protocols, along with LA County and Ventura and Kern, and there's others. But when you look at the history of Fire Scope, which we won't get in tonight, but Santa Barbara County Fire was very intimate in that as well. And here's a community that's trying to get it together, which is not unlike what they're trying to accomplish now in Los Angeles County with the rise of small fire companies yet again in LA County, which went way out of their way back in the late 90s and early 2000s to get rid of the volunteers. LA County had a volunteer force for decades, and then it slowly kind of just went away, and there was a variety of reasons for that. And now we see it starting to come back, modeled very much like what we've been doing in the WRA all the way back to the beginning.
Well, I think economics has a lot to do with it, because what happens when you can inspire the residents in an area to do volunteer work that the agencies would be having to do, and also the people that live in the areas. And this is one of the founding principles that we have with the Fire Safe Council, and also we had with the Wildland Residents Association, is that people live in the area actually have a lot more knowledge about what the capabilities and necessities and the shortcomings are of their communities than the agencies do.
Well, also the fire history. What the fire is actually going to do, because they tend to do the same thing as time goes on. So you've been able to get a community together and elicit the help of the Santa Barbara County Fire in this case to build this thing up, which is interesting because typically the agencies are not big in allowing civilian engagement. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I'm not suggesting they're all wrong or they're all right, but you were successful in getting through that maze, because not only do you have to deal with the county, but you also have the union to contend with, public perception. It's a maze.
Well, one of the things that we did is we did not seek notoriety. Like we actually got the permission to do what we were going to do, and then we did it. And we weren't really interested in standing in the spotlight or touting ourselves. In fact, I was reluctant to actually talk to the press for many years, because I didn't want to have that aspect of it. I just wanted to have it so that the neighborhood understood who each other was and who would be there for them, and everyone had a different job, a different idea of what needed to be done, and we got them all together and moving in the same direction. It was very successful.
What do you think the number one obstacle was for you as an organization to really get the thing moving?
Well, I think one of the things was that I had belonged to several organizations on the past, but I had never been involved in public speaking or leading meetings
Right.
And then another thing is that I'm a terrible administrator. I mean, I'm not really that. Of course, that was where you helped us out tremendously, because that's the talent that you have that is beyond my ken.
Well, everything has to have its sections of growth.
We have one of the real abilities about working in communities is to understand what the shortcomings and the fortes of the people that are volunteering. And so that you can put people in the right places where they're comfortable and doing what they like to do, and they're adding to and that's a real it's an interesting puzzle.
Well, fast forward to where we are today, many of the people that were there in the beginning are still with us and still around, but they certainly aren't able to volunteer in the capacity that perhaps they want to, or that their brain is saying, hey, you got to jump on and go do something, where your body's saying, no, you're not going anywhere.
Well, that's one of the things that's a challenge for us, of course, is to continue to get new blood involved in the organization.
Right.
And we haven't been very good at recruitment. And I think because a number of reasons. I think that we are a small volunteer department, that we have much faster response now, both from the Forest Service and from the County Fire Department. So it's not necessary for us to be quite as efficient as we were early on.
Right.
And I think that people are very, very busy these days making a living, and it's difficult for them to take on volunteer work.
Well, certainly the volunteer fire service, the idea that you're a volunteer and just doing what you can when you can help out, those days are long gone. The training requirements, the mandate, the supervision,
Absolutely.
the administrative requirements, the oversight, it's all there.
And the insurance was very difficult for us.
Right.
Because the insurance requirements are that was our largest expense, as you know, for many years, as it wasn't so much the keeping up the fire trucks and keeping because we ended up having a fire vehicle pretty much in every community, or accessible to every community, and that's a large amount, but to cover the insurance for the volunteers and liability insurance and errors and emissions insurance for the board of directors and all that sort of thing, very expensive.
But we've been doing it now for a long time, and it's working. It's worked well, and financially we're as secure as we've ever been.
Well, we got our 501c3 nonprofit in 1982, which was 5 years after we organized.
Right.
And it took quite a while and quite a bit of work and a lot of understanding before we really grasped what all of it was, what the structure was about, and how it went together. It was a fascinating time for me because I learned so much,
Right.
And now that I know everything,
well, don't we wish? The running of a nonprofit, I think, is more difficult than running a for-profit. There's so many other rules that factor in, and areas of accountability and mandated reporting, and the way the taxes is dealt with are dealt with.
Absolutely, and not only that, I think people volunteer for different reasons.
Yes.
And what you have to be able to do as an administrator, you have to read what it is that they're volunteering, what reward are they looking for? And there are so many different things once you get involved with different types of people. It takes a lot of work to figure out what exactly it is that you can give to them that will make them feel comfortable about continuing.
Well, and the type of volunteer that we're looking for, or similar volunteer departments, is different than what you would with Equine Evac or with Red Cross or with CERT or whatever. Each one has its unique personalities and their culture, and you need to get people that resonate well with that. And some of it crosses over, for sure, no doubt, but other parts of it a little unique.
Well, one of the things that the volunteers on San Marcos Pass experiences, it's very physical.
Yes, it is.
And it's, you have to know not only how to operate a big four-wheel drive vehicle under circumstances that are not ideal, but you also have to know and be capable of hauling hose up a hillside and knowing when to use the water and when to get the devil out of there, And I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of data that you have to be able to process and to be able to do
Takes
your
a
job.
certain type of individual personality, and we have a recruitment training process that seems to do a pretty good job of, I don't want to say weeding out necessarily, but making sure people are comfortable with what they're doing, because it is a commitment both in time, in training and response, but also you get out on the fire line, now it's showtime, this is real, this is not a place to find out that
Well,
maybe you don't like it.
As you know, we've been very fortunate.
Yes.
We have not had anybody get hurt in all these years, and there've been some close calls and things but we've been very fortunate.
We are very, very safety conscious, and I would urge anyone that's involved in the volunteer world to be very, very conscious. It's the Gordon Graham scenario: high risk, low frequency, no time to think. Well, you need that time to think to decide whether or not this is a place where you belong, or your people belong, or your organization belongs. And that requires maturity and some supervision that doesn't always exist.
And also and dependency on a team.
Right.
And you really need that team consciousness in order to be able to work together.
I think the other aspect of this that's important to point out to the viewers is that who's the customer? Who are we here for? And the obligation of a volunteer organization to its community is different than that of a public safety agency who has a much larger responsibility, and they're also in charge. It's their agency that's responsible. So that changes the dynamics of things. What are you here to do? Have you accomplished that task? And now are you ready to go and stand back and take care of the second tier stuff, which I think is really where the most value comes from, is the ability to deal with the people that can't get out, and the people that have medical issues, or the people that are in areas where the county and the Forest Service can't necessarily get up there for whatever.
Or don't even know that they're there.
They don't even know. And those are things that we can do very well. So
Right.
you brought up an issue that I thought was kind of interesting, and it gets us in the direction we need to go here tonight, and that is public information, public speaking, and basically the marketing component, that you guys weren't comfortable with that. And then ultimately, here we are tonight doing television, and we've got 16 years under our belt of doing radio every week. So, I mean, the pendulum certainly swung.
Yeah, it has.
What caused that?
Well, I think that we didn't plan when we first went on the radio to be doing it for more than a couple of months. We figured we'd do it for 2 or 3 months, and here we are 16 years later, and we're moving forward. And I think what's happening is that it has captured a sector that has not been addressed before, and that is being able to bring the public, the homeowner, and the agencies together to solve problems. And that was what actually got the Fire Safe Council started. But we were working in that realm, long before the Fire Safe Council got started in the late 90s. And I think what's happening is that there's an understanding today that is continuing, that there needs to be communication. And communication is a bottom line for good community.
Right.
And my feeling is that we need very definitely today to have more faith in our ability to do things with the government, and renew faith in the government, and I think that organizing communities is a great way to do that, because the individual does not have the power that the community has as a larger entity, because of the voting bloc and just the fact that writing letters and all that sort of thing makes a big difference, and you find that the politicians start listening to you, and the agency heads start listening to you, and so you get to be able to make the change, rather than being the individual that writes into the local next door and raves about what their pet peeves are. It's just not nearly as successful.
No, it's much more professionalized, and better standing, I guess would be a way to put it. But the Community Alert radio show was an outgrowth of the radio station we put on the air for San Marcos Pass following the Gaviota fire, which was, 2005. So you came up with an idea. Why don't we expand on that a little bit, the birth of Community Alert?
Well, I thought what we should do is put together a program that we would do in our home, and talk about current events and use the radio station that we had up on my property to reach out to the community, because it had a limited perimeter, that it didn't go out to a large area, but covered pretty much just the people that were living up there. And so we talked about it with you, and then you, because you came from the background of family of radio commentators and things like that, you were able to mention it to the radio station, and they said, well, sure, we'd love to try to put something like that together.
My attitude was, if we're going to do it, let's do it right, or at least attempt to do it right, whatever right was.
Sure.
And if we're going to do it on the air, let's do it with more than 10 watts. And let's get a larger audience, hence my interest in reaching out. So with Charlie Johnson, who at the time was the public information officer for Santa Barbara County Fire and a legend in the town, and the co-founder of EPIC, which was the PIO group, along with Barbara Anderson, who at the time was running the Orfla Foundation's Aware and Prepare program. That's where the funding came from initially.
Correct.
To start the Community Alert. And you're right, I remember vividly, we're not going to be able to get more than 4 or 5 shows out of this, and we're going to run out of stuff to talk about. And how can you talk about fire for more than a couple months? And we talk about a lot of things, obviously, but we did pretty well for ourselves despite that.
Well, I think one of the things we did really well was to bring in guests from all sorts of different venues, that had something to do with public safety, and we did everything from weathermen to geologists to we talked about volcanoes and
earthquakes,
all of it, tsunamis, and of course the mud flow was a topic of conversation for some time, and I think that now we're much more aware of the possibility of that sort of thing happening.
Well, we had some interesting, Ronnie Coleman, former state fire marshal, we had him on repeatedly. Went all the way back to Emmitsburg and interviewed the superintendent of the National Fire Academy, Dr. Dennis O'Neill. Did that. That was a fun interview. We did a lot of stuff remotely over the years, and it made it interesting and different and challenging, to be for sure. But eventually it became fully sponsored by the California Fire Safe Council, and later now it's sponsored by the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council, which is the direction we wanted it to go anyway.
Exactly.
Because it helps them. But backing up a bit, let's talk a bit about the Fire Safe Council here in Santa Barbara, because you go all the way back to the beginning of that.
Right.
Both at the California state level as well as the local level. And we've had a series of grants independent of broadcasting in doing fuel grant work for decades now.
Exactly.
So let's expand on that.
Well, what happened in the latter part of the 90s, latter part of the century actually, was that there was a gentleman who was a legend, and it was a Forest Service chief, and then moved on to Montecito, became the chief of Montecito Fire, and his name was Herb McElway, who's passed away by now, but he came to me, and he knew me as a community member and organizer, and he came to me and told me this idea that had been developing at the state level, because he'd been spending a lot of time in Sacramento and getting funding and that sort of thing. And he said that they were starting up this state organization called the California Fire Safe Council, and they were encouraging communities to organize. And he thought that we should organize in Santa Barbara County. And so we started meeting at Montecito Fire, and we met there for a couple of years, and then we got a grant, and we got a chipper donated to us through the Cal Fire, and it's just started growing. And for many years, we were mostly, it was all volunteers, and many of the volunteers were agency people. I mean, we had from from all the fire departments around the county of Santa Barbara, and then there were people from the private sector and from the Forest Service and people that were outside of the from like the Edison Company, and a lot of the power companies got involved, and we just had a big forum, and we would come together around a big round table and have a round table discussion about different things, and we'd have different people speak on subjects they're interested in putting out there, and we did that for many years. We did not want to be involved with grants because grants take so much administration, and we didn't want to have all that admin work to do. So what we did was we became a 501c3, and then we would take on different community projects for the communities, get them to administrate at their grant, and but we would use our name to get the grant. And that happened all the way up until about, 5 years ago, I guess. And then suddenly, the agencies at the higher level, at the state level, and at the federal level, started realizing that the fire safe councils that were local in all these different areas were the best means to take funding and use it for the right purposes, and because they were all set up with a fire background, and so all of a sudden we started getting a lot of funding. And
now Herb was an interesting fellow because he had come from Santa Barbara County Fire. He had been a battalion chief there, and he ultimately became fire chief at Montecito. And he was what I would categorize as an old school fire chief. He was
absolutely.
the happy, outgoing, everybody's your friend, big smile, and he was out whining and dining and pressing the flesh, which is not something that fire chiefs do today for the most part.
No.
It's become so bureaucratic and office driven that you don't have the time and capability. But that was Herb, but he was also unusual in that he was very supportive of getting community involvement, where some of his contemporaries weren't necessarily sharing the same level of vigor of enthusiasm.
That's right.
So, and for a variety of reasons. And but Herb really put out there, and I remember Herb told me once, and this was early when I got involved, was that you want to know what's going on, you got to get out of your chair and go out and find out.
Yeah. Well.
And he became kind of a mentor to the organization as well as to us. And that's kind of one of the driving forces that built up EPIC, the PIO group, was the number of people, both professionally and civilian side, that were upset because they didn't know what was going on. Nobody's telling me anything. I don't know. There's no media. Whatever the wank was of the moment. And it was, what did Herb say? Herb says, if you don't know what's going on, then get up and go find out.
Yeah.
It's not everybody else's obligation to tell you what's going on. And that became a big driving force for us. And I think it was huge advice that we really capitalized on.
Well, I think what we wanted to do is we wanted to put out a message that had veracity and that was actually coming from sources that actually knew what was going on, and that we were carrying that message to the people that were on the street, as it were, and listening to it in their cars and at work and that sort of thing.
Well, the other thing is that there were things that we as an organization wanted to do, but we didn't have the access. We didn't have the money, or we had certain political obstacles. There are a variety of things, and they're not unique to us. It wasn't like anybody was picking on us. It was just that they were there. It's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
So we had to create them things, and EPIC was an example of something that was created, and that was in conjunction with the agencies as well. That was a tremendously successful organization. Of public information officers from all the agencies, including the school districts and the air pollution control and Caltrans, and it was phenomenal. And for us, the advantage was that we were able to have access now to places that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get into directly. So I think that was shrewd, I think is a good way to put it, that we got involved in that. And it also helped us, that community alert, because all those people are now available to come on the show as guests. And it wasn't for us, It was to get their message out because they didn't have the
Well,
capability.
that was an interesting shift that happened a few years ago, where all of a sudden we didn't have to ask.
Well, now they all want to come on.
People wanted to come and discuss different topics that were important to them.
Well, remember the fear that you and I would get into some areas that they didn't want discussed, or that we would go on wild rampages on
Well, we
things
were
we
very
knew
good
nothing
about that.
But we respected everybody's position and understood too that some things don't belong in the public arena in that environment. And we were very careful about all. But at the same time, we didn't carry anybody's water for them either.
No, and we've always had kind of tongue-in-cheek going on between us, and
You got to
laughing.
keep it amusing. If it gets boring fast. If
We
you're not
were, that's right, that's right. But I think that part of the message I think that I'd like to get out there is the fact that we really need today to have regaining a sense of control at the lowest level of community, and bringing the community organizations to the fore, and get people to see that by working together we can accomplish many things. And I think it's showing today very well. And now we're looking at millions of dollars coming into the Fire Safe Council.
Certainly at the Fire Safe Council, it has expanded way beyond what it was when we first started out with that. And it's kind of evolved now. Where all the money's coming from and the energy that's behind it at the state level, way beyond anything that we're generating here. But Santa Barbara in particular is benefiting significantly.
Well, the question is, of course, how long is it going to last? Because it's a political. There's a political element.
Absolutely, there is.
And and we don't really have the vision or the connection to know exactly what the vagaries are going to be in that respect.
Well,
and so what we're doing is we're doing as much as we possibly can with what we're getting in order to make the change that we can make right now, because we have no guarantees that these funds are going to continue.
Well, you're very active in the Fire Safe Council. I kind of backed out. I can't be involved in all these different, it just takes too much time. And the other thing is you can only wear so many hats. And I think that was one of the big takeaways that I had a decade ago, is that you start getting involved in all these organizations, you're not going to be effective in any of them.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's a lot of pull.
Yeah.
It comes and responsibility, and feeling of, your time is, you don't have enough time to really do what you've promised everyone you were going to do.
Right, and so you've got to make an assessment. What's the important thing? Where are you most effective? Where do people need you? What do your peers want, don't want? Where are your skills that you're good at, as opposed to the things that you're self-destructive or causing problems? Sure. And I think that the volunteer community as a whole in Santa Barbara, particularly on the South Coast, has benefited a lot over the last 10 to 15 years of the mindset that seems to be pretty consistent. You see it in CERT, you see it in Listos, you see it in some of the other support organizations. I mentioned Equine, EVAC, and then there's others, all of whom level of expertise and professionalism has certainly come up a lot. And that you don't hear the kind of feedback that we used to hear 20 years ago about these different organizations. There's the amateur radio, or ARIES, they're in there as well. I don't want to forget anybody, but there's so many different ones. But they all work together, and I think they all want to, at this point, be as at least organized and respected as the others in that arena, and I think we've certainly accomplished that.
Well, the thing is that we have moved around the community and met at different places and had different community organizations. I mean, the American Red Cross supported us for quite some time, and of course the Orfalea Foundation was very supportive, and what's happened now is that it's turned into a very large. In fact, the Fire Safe Council has had to hire a paid staff, which we never had before, and to administer the grants.
Well, you've evolved out of being a volunteer organization.
Well, that's right.
And now it's becoming a professional organization of paid staff, which changes the dynamics of pretty much everything.
The whole thing changes,
I'm curious to see how that pans out over the next 5 years. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just think that as the agencies are more and more involved in the cooperative efforts of nonprofits, it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. The State Fire Marshal's office is significantly more involved in this than they have been in the past.
Well, the thing, I think the telling feature is going to be how long does the funding continue?
Well, I think
because we're going through this period of plenty. There seems to be a great deal of emphasis on fire prevention and all the different aspects of that. And how long that's going to stay in focus and continue the funding, that's going to have a lot to do with it.
Well, I think that the issue of the inability of obtaining insurance is certainly got to be a part of the driving force. Another is the utilities, the big three in California. That's a driving force. Property values. If you can't get your home insured properly or you can't get utilities to it, what's the value of your property?
Well,
that impacts property taxes.
So what's happened is that we've gone from cutting the brush around your home, which is something they've been doing that since the late 70s, actually, is encouraging people to cut the brush around their home. Now it's gotten out into so many different areas and so much that takes a tremendous amount of planning and a lot of staff and a lot of work by a number of people in order to make all of these different things happen, because we've got like chipping programs and grazing programs and all these different things.
One of the questions that I have, and I don't know if this is the right forum for it, but is where is this the agency's responsibility, whether it be CAL FIRE or Ventura City or County or Santa Barbara or whomever, the Forest Service, which is federal, it's one of the 5 federal agencies. Where is the responsibility for public agencies to be doing this, and where is the demarcation to the private landowners?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think that it depends on the communities that are being served by the different agencies. Some communities are fairly trim the grass along your driveway and and more wildland urban interface areas, and then you have the more rural areas where people are more willing to take it on themselves to do a lot more. And I think that the agencies, the emergency service agencies like the fire departments and any of the Edison companies and all of the different utility groups and all that sort of thing, I think that they have a job to do, which is to do the manual work of it. And I think that the communities need to give that to the fire departments and to the different, and allow them to, and not try to interfere with that. And that's, excuse me, that's one of the things that I think on the pass, on San Marcos Pass, that we started the volunteer fire department because we had a big time lag between the time that a fire would start and the time that the agencies could get there. So we got involved with providing trucks and all that sort of thing that were closer to the incidents, and then as soon as the agencies would come, we'd supply water and back away from it. But I think what's happening is that there's nowadays the agencies are able to fill all the gaps because their engines are stronger and faster. The roads are better. We've got a lot of clearing on the road, so they're not so dangerous to travel during a time of fire. So I think the communities need to back away from the aspect of fighting the fire.
Certainly the initial attack component, which is what you're referring to, is between the time of ignition and the call gets into the dispatch center. Dispatch notifies the stations, they're on their way. Our ability up there on the hill to get there first without even trying.
Right, we're there.
Was significant, we're already there. So the initial attack, and there's no question that has been a good thing over the decades. But you're absolutely right. The response time now is significantly quicker. And so the initial attack situation is different. Although, with the advent of electric car fires and some of the newer fires that we're starting to see, the pendulum started to swing out their way again. But with Edison and PG&E and Southern California Gas and Electric and San Diego, as they've changed out their entire electrical infrastructure, some of the primary ignition sources of the past, mainly downed wires and transformers blowing up and what, is becoming less and less and less by far. And the birds getting into the wires is a less of a problem. So, things are balancing out, and I think the same will happen too, correct me if I'm wrong, but as we go through the next couple of years of fire safe grant distribution and the mitigation programs and projects, because you're right, some of them are rather large and probably way beyond the ability of small nonprofits to manage if you want to get serious about it. We'll find a balancing sweet spot in there someplace where we can say, okay, well, these are the kinds of projects that nonprofit community groups can get involved in and should participate in. And these things over here is where the adults should play.
Right.
And
well, I think what's happening in our area in Santa Barbara County is the fact that most of the emphasis on the work that we've been doing has been in the south part of the county, because that's where the population is. But we're now working a great deal bringing the North County into the game, and so that means that the things that we have learned in South County, getting the community wildfire protection plans created, and all the work that we've done with organizing the communities to help us make decisions about what's going to happen there. I think that we have lots of work still to do in the North County, but Tepiscay and Lompoc and all these fringe areas are now becoming because they're seeing what the benefits are from being involved.
Well, it's also creating some focus across the board. You're seeing the public works agencies doing more than they have in the past. That's not to pick on any one. It's just that clearing the roads and getting your 10 to 20 foot clearance on both sides we're not fighting for that anymore. It's happening.
Right.
And that is huge in keeping the car fires contained. Getting up onto the side roads and getting signs and posting back up where it belongs, where you can see it, that's certainly up there. There's another component to this that we have nothing to do with, but I think is a critical aspect of fire prevention, and that's enforcement. And you're seeing much more enforcement now, not necessarily writing tickets to people, but doing inspections and doing enforcement of clearing and making sure people are in compliance. There's much more of that now statewide than there used to be, and there's going to be a lot more. They are now funding the state fire marshal's office to staff appropriately as they need to be able to go do that. And then the contract counties such as Santa Barbara will have additional people to do that, to go out and actually make sure it's getting done. And that's another big component. People don't talk about it, but that's part of the fire prevention.
Well, I think that goes hand in hand with what the Fire Safe Council has put into place, and that is they're providing a service to community members to have staff come out and with a checklist and go over their property with them and point out the things that need to be changed in order to make their homes much safer.
That's a form of self-policing.
Well, it is, and what that does is it takes the onus off of the agencies and gives it to the communities where it should be, and the communities should be involved with that sort of thing, and giving them a little bit of an interface between the agencies and the communities.
Well, I think that the another component of this is the insurance companies themselves, who are getting much more shrewd in their evaluations and their assessment, ISO ratings in the area where the insurance industry does its inspections, and in turn actually making sure that homeowners are doing things that are productive in protecting the property. It's a big project. I don't think the insurance companies have taken on as much as they could yet, but they will. That right now they're playing a game, and the game is kind of a chicken thing. Who's going to break first?
Right.
Eventually, the property tax situation will drive some of that, because the state's going to go, wait a minute, you got to move real estate, and you can't move it if you can't insure it. And so there's going to be some changes in that. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but
Well,
certainly.
there's going to have to be some innovation because it's not working right now.
No,
I mean,
no.
people are just not insuring.
Which is
if
a
they're not-
dangerous situation.
Absolutely. It's very, very dangerous economically. And what's happening is that people that have had mortgages are paying the mortgages off, and then they're not reinsuring because the bank is over their head with making them get
And yet,
insurance.
that's your principal investment in most people's cases. Is
Absolutely.
your house is your investment. How are you going to replace it? And the irony is that some of the homes in our area can't be replaced. They're not going to let you rebuild
Right.
it. So that raises yet another question. Why do I want to insure a home that can't be rebuilt?
Well,
For
yeah.
all the different reasons that are out there. And that's not unique to Santa Barbara. You go up to Paradise, or you go up into Humboldt or Trinity County or El Dorado or
Anywhere
Plumas
has,
or any of those
that
places.
has a rural population
Orange
has
County
a
even.
problem. Yeah.
You get up into Majeska, Silverado, well, Trabuco's kind of completely all built up with new homes. But
Well, I look
it's
at
not-
San Diego County
Yeah.
and Julian, and back up in the top, and those
Yeah.
areas up there. I mean, it's pervasive in California because you have the concentrated population areas, and then it thins out, and then you get out into the hinterlands. And
So, I mean, this gets complicated stuff. And, it all started off with a group discussion about a homeowners association of sorts. It's not a homeowners association, but a community group back in after a major wildfire. And look what we're talking about today. These are big ticket items. And yet we're in the playing field participating.
Well, we've kind of become grown-ups. We were just learners back in those days, and now.
Well, I think
we've
it
been
goes
there.
to what Herb McElway said, is you want to know what's going on, you got to get out of your office and go find out. Well, the extension of that is if you're going to take care of your property or find out what's going on, you got to engage and go do something about it. And that really hasn't changed much. For all the changes that we've had in our society, you still are pretty much left on your own when it comes to protecting your own
But
interests.
what's happening now that wasn't happening before we got started organizing is the fact that we have answers for people that are trying to find them. You don't have to go out and beat the bushes for the answers because the answers are there now on the websites for the county fire department. The Wildland Residents Association is a really great website advising people on how to make their homes safer for fire. Home hardening is the term that's used.
Right.
And the different kinds of materials that you can use, and one of the big things is not having a wooden fence connected to your house and having 5 or 6 feet of steel fence so that the fence doesn't act as a fuse. Don't have a grass mat, a welcome mat at your front door because it can burn your house down. And I mean, just the idea of embers and ember loading is something that's only come about in the last 10, 15 years.
There's a lot more science now than there used to
Well,
be.
just more
Yeah.
information out there, and I think it's all available to people much more readily than it used to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. And yet there's still people who want their privacy and they are not going to conform. And that's one of the challenges in that the weakest link becomes the biggest threat to a neighborhood, especially something like Painted Cave, because it's so congested in there. It's the same thing with Isla Vista. You've got so much density there. Solvang, city of Solvang is
Well, if
another one.
one of those buildings goes up in one of these tight communities, it'll take the whole thing out because the fire burns up and then it just rains fire down on everything around
And you
it.
do not have to have that up there. That happened down in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago. They lost an entire block from that. And Quincy, an area that I'm in frequently working up there with the guys, they've burned down 2 blocks up. Well, actually, they've had 3 fires that I'm aware of that started off as just your standard everyday fire call.
Well, I think both the fire in Paradise and the Lahaina fire have awakened the public a tremendous amount to what can go wrong. And
Fast, how fast it is.
very fast, and encouraging emergency systems to be put in place so that people get some warning. And many little towns don't have that. They don't afford it. They don't want to frighten people I know that we had a big system of sirens that we had for fire, and people, we couldn't actually test the system because people would get so afraid that they would do foolish things thinking that the fire was upon them, forgetting that this is a test, you know. Anyway, there's all those things, and we're learning a great deal as we go along, and there's lots left to learn.
Well, we're kind of winding down here. We've got another 8 minutes to go, and I want to get a little bit into the future. What do you see the future of both the WRA and the Fire Safe Council? We're kind of going in the same direction. What do you see?
Well, from my perspective, what we need to be doing is being more interfacing with the residents and less fire suppression. I think that we need to be able to understand and work with the fire agencies to understand our communities well enough so that the fire suppression is taken care of by the professionals, and that the communities can deal with things like the people that have health problems or mobility problems, children problems, the fire, it's the Murphy Law situation. What can go wrong will go wrong. That fire is going to come when the kids, they're no longer doing it, but they used to walk like 3/4 of a mile from where the bus stopped through the chaparral to their homes. And that was a recipe for disaster, you know, and thank goodness the school system stopped that.
I think you're right about that. Certainly the response tactics used by the agencies that I watch has changed to much more aggressive. Things that you would not have seen, like putting airplanes up as quickly as they do on reasonably small fires.
Yeah.
The operating cost of the DC-10 is staggering, and yet you'll see that thing called up. Now, there's a lot of politics and there's other things involved there, but the fact that it's even happening shows a significant change in tactics and the logistics that are already in place, ready to go on very short notice. And there's no question that Santa Barbara is benefiting from this tactic change.
And I think that all the communities that are vulnerable are going to be benefiting from the change in the perspective of the higher agencies. Like, the Navy came in and flew planes into a couple of our fires from out of Point Mugu. Those sort of things are, I think we're going to see more and more of that. And we're going to see more and more education of the general public about how to deal with emergencies.
Well, the folks in Sacramento, Congress, have really started to take this serious. They've completely retrofitted and cleaned up the air division of CAL FIRE. It's all brand new equipment, helicopters and fixed wing. You're not seeing S-2s and old bombers and things like that anymore. They're gone. And everything's not necessarily...
That's because the wings were falling off.
Well, there's a problem with that. But now they're just buying stuff made and designed specifically for that task. And they're buying a lot of it, and they're training the pilots and the crews to work on it. And they get the technical support to maintain it, because the maintenance on this stuff is also a big factor. So you've got that. The communications aspect is certainly being changed and tightened up. One of the areas of challenge, though, believe it or not, is the fact that not so many people want to be firefighters anymore. That's hard to believe, but I've talked to several fire chiefs from metropolitan fire departments that are having serious problems with recruitment and retention. Now, that's not an unheard of problem in Northern California with your fire districts and your volunteer fire companies and stuff, but to hear major cities saying, I don't have enough people applying for the jobs that can get through the background and make it through the fire training process, that's kind of spooky, because they are getting paid reasonably well for what that...
Oh, absolutely.
So this is going to become an issue. There's some things you can't automate, and digging fire line is one of them.
Right. And it's not something you're going to be able to automate either.
No. And so recruitment of firefighters is starting to happen as early as high school. And you start EOP programs, and you go in, you get folks that don't know where they want to go in life. They don't know what they're going to do. They certainly are not academic bound into advanced education, into going into medicine or law or engineering or something. Firefighting is a huge career
Well,
opportunity.
I think a lot of firefighters in the last 20 years came out of the military. And now that we don't have such a
Right.
large military situation, although that may change rapidly.
The right things are going,
Yeah. So, but I think that there's I mean, I see the fact that our social dynamic is changing.
Yeah.
And so it's going to change the whole way that community structures and the youth today thinks differently than they did 20 years ago. And I think that, but I do know that a number of young people really do want to be emergency service personnel, EMTs, paramedics. I mean, they're just moved to do that sort of thing.
Yep.
And the same thing applies to the fire services and the police work as well. The only problem I see is that because we have so much domestic strife, that it becomes more dangerous to be someone that's on
Well,
the
yeah,
street.
it's not like it is on TV, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that it's going to. It's also a profession that I would urge people to get into that want to do that. But just understand what you're getting into. It's not what you see on TV.
No, of course.
The brochure does not give you all the details that you probably want to be aware of. And as you said, it is extremely physically demanding. It's not the only occupation. Like railroading is another extremely demanding physical. Working in the public works department is physically demanding. It's
How about hospital staffing? You know,
well, that's
I mean,
a whole nother world, another
huge.
discussion for another day. But but this is conversations that you and I are having now that would have never occurred back in the initial days of the WRA, or most of all the other nonprofits that are in on the kind of the ancillary public safety arena. But today they're all privy to this, they're aware of it, and they're staying on top of it, which means they can start having some adult conversations with the public safety agencies.
Well, one of my things today that I'm really advocating for, and would like to see more of, is to take a closer look at evacuation. I think that is a situation that deserves a lot more attention, because people, for one thing, don't really know how to drive in a dangerous situation with fire surrounding them, and you know, driving into smoke, driving into areas where there's choke points and the traffic
Right.
may get stopped, and then you're with your family and the animals and all in the car, and here you are stuck because someone took a wrong turn, drove off the road or something, and people need to know what you do in those situations and how to behave. So.
Well, Ted, we're out of time. It's
I'll
time for
be
us to
darned.
go. I mean, Santa Barbara Forum, we want to thank you for taking
Absolutely.
time. We want to thank Frank Goss if he happens to be watching. We grabbed a photo of his old restaurant there, right there on the back. That's the old Arts and Letters patio that you and I spent many a day in.
Yeah.
So I want to thank that. Thank Mike Nichols, who's in the back room. He's at the control board, making sure everything is going in the right direction. And this has been an interesting little chat with you.
Well, it went by awfully quickly, didn't it? As
Anybody have any
usual.
questions? Give us a check on community@wildlandresidence.org. We'll be happy to get back to you on our email. You can also visit our website, wildlandresidence.org. Be happy to get there. And Community Alert Tuesdays on KZSB AM 1290, 11 o'clock. We got, what, 4 more shows to do?
4 more shows.
Yeah, that's it. We're done. So,
All right.
well, thank you very much. We'll see you next week.